question you ask yourself is, how competitive are you? What lengths are you willing to go to try to win? You gonna poke him in the eye? Are you gonna take your thumb and dig it in the cut and pull it open a little wider? Of course you will. Literally from that one tournament, it catapulted me into the spotlight.
It's like saying that, like, you know, it's risking everything because the reward is so good, you know? And it's like, the highs from the sport are like no other highs in the world. You know, like having, you know, 12,000 people out there cheering for you. That's orgasmic. That's like high, you know? And it's so raw because it's just two people out there competing in the most primitive form possible, you know?
He's the winner of the 1994 World Cup Wrestling Champion. He's the winner of the Men's Freestyle National Title, an NCAA Division I champion. He stands 6 feet, 1 inch tall, and weighs in at 255 pounds. Fighting out of Phoenix, Arizona, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Mark Kerr.
On January 19th, 1997, a towering figure of scientifically enhanced muscle and bone waited to make the walk for the first leg of an 8-man Vale Tudo tournament, where there were more posts in the ring than rules for the combatants. Standing at 6'1" and 200 imposing pounds of muscle, the 28-year-old amateur wrestling standout was a major favorite before he'd even stepped foot in the ring.
Our next fight, this is highly anticipated. In the blue corner, the American freestyle wrestler Mark Kerr, 28, 6'1", 260 pounds. He's from Toledo, Ohio. Freestyle wrestling is his forte. This is his first fight.
But inside his striking silhouette roared a storm of immense pressure, rippling doubt, and a hidden enemy that would someday almost take his life. This is the real story of Mark Kerr, the Smashing Machine. Born December 21st in 1968 in Toledo, Ohio, to parents Tom and Mary Kerr, Mark was the youngest of 7 children. A typical Midwestern kid with a bit too much energy, Mark dreamed of becoming a superhero or a professional wrestler when he grew up. Both things he practiced in brotherly rows with his siblings. By 12, his zest for mischief had become a detriment to both his academic success and the peace and quiet that his aging parents craved. While Mark was never a violent kid, he was somewhat directionless, which showed itself in a troublemaking streak. After one final straw, or several final straws, the Kerrs decided that their youngest needed some time away with his eldest brother in the now former, then future, MMA hotbed of Davenport, Iowa. Mark spent 2 years in Davenport, attending Bettendorf High while following a set schedule of whatever sport was in season. This meant that for Mark, he cycled through a heavy athletic schedule of football, wrestling, track, and baseball to meet his mother's expectations. He especially excelled on the wrestling mats of Bettendorf High, wrestling as a freshman while he shared the mats with a motivated team that included future UFC champ Pat Miletich. This athletic focus seemed to give Mark a solid foundation for focus, but it also helped him in a different way. It made him much, much bigger. While he wrestled at 135 pounds during his freshman season in Davenport, he was cutting to make 175 by the time he returned to Toledo for his junior year to wrestle for the Toledo Weight High School. All that added muscle, athleticism, and drive played a major role in his first sporting achievement, a win at the 1986 Ohio Division I Championship at 175 pounds. Though he entered injured with a little thought of winning, he is the first and only athlete to bring a wrestling state title into the halls of Toledo Weight. The victory was a watershed moment for the future pro fighter. but it also put him on the national map for a possible full ride to wrestle in college. While he'd eventually go to Syracuse University, it wouldn't last long.
When I was 20 years old, I was on scholarship at Syracuse University, and I had lost my scholarship academically. I just wasn't progressing as a student. So the university had asked me to take a year off of school.
Before he knew it, he was that same directionless kid that got sent off to live with his eldest brother. But this time, he was 20 years old and ready for adventure, even if he had to work a bit along the way. After coming home for a very short break from the road, Kerr was back out again, touring with The Who for their 1989 North American tour. While this physically demanding line of work kept Kerr strong, it also did something else. It introduced him to narcotics like cocaine.
And I started experimenting a little bit then with it. You know, the sense of euphoria and alertness, it almost feels like you have Spider-Man senses. Like I can hear an ant walk across, the floor from 30 feet away, and I can smell you 2 blocks away. And
the substance acted like a window into the world of performance enhancers. Kerr liked the feeling. It helped him work harder, and by extension, it made him more money since he could work longer days. After the tour was over, Kerr returned to Toledo, finding himself at square one once again. With no prospects, he decided to return to Syracuse for one last shot at a collegiate career. Once he got his grades high enough, he was back on the Syracuse University wrestling team and hunting for a national title. And by 1992, he nabbed it, besting future MMA great Randy Couture 12-4 in the finals for the Division I championship at 190 pounds, and the status of All-American.
Kerr continued his domination in the second period, snagging yet another takedown against Couture to extend his lead to 7-2. Final will read, Kerr the champion, 12-4.
And Mark Kerr of Syracuse will be a first-time winner at 190 pounds.
Following his collegiate success, Kerr chased worldwide recognition, earning a multitude of medals from 92 to 96 as he chased the ultimate goal, Olympic gold. During this time, he trained alongside a who's who of America's top operators at Team Foxcatcher, a private wrestling program situated on Foxcatcher Farm and headed by Mark and Dave Schultz. Following the tragic events surrounding the murder of Dave Schultz by the program's benefactor, John E. DuPont,
police say John DuPont shot Olympic wrestling great Dave Schultz last night.
John E. DuPont, an heir to the chemical company Riches, remains barricaded inside. Police suspect he shot and killed Olympic wrestler Dave Schultz.
DuPont, police said early on in the standoff, was their only suspect in shooting.
Late today, DuPont was charged with the murder of Dave Schultz, one of America's greatest amateur sports heroes.
Kerr controversially stayed on the team. Even if the money kept flowing and the program soldiered on with fewer members, the chaos did little to help his Olympic aspirations. He ended his wrestling career after failing in yet another match to his arch-rival and occasional training partner, Kurt Angle, the man he'd later watch crest the Olympic podium in 1996. But as bad as losing his Olympic dreams were to the competitor in Mark Kerr, the next blow would strike to the heart of the person Mark Kerr. Kerr's mother and #1 supporter, Mary Kerr, passed away shortly after the 1996 Olympic Games. After taking time to process the enormous loss, Kerr was itching for the next step of his competitive life, and one that paid. A phone call to a certain Richard Hamilton was the closest thing to a lead the 27-year-old Kerr had to go on. Hamilton, an Arizona-based karate instructor who specialized in bringing high-level wrestling to the world of no-holds-barred, was turning his attention to a new generation of wrestlers. One that were physically imposing, driven to win, and just plain mean. Mark Kerr was at the top of that list, but he'd already turned down an opportunity to compete in UFC 10 due to his mother's health. While Hamilton didn't have a UFC slot for Kerr, he had the next best thing: a flight to Brazil for a one-night, 8-man, no-holds-barred tournament in Sao Paulo, Brazil, called World Vale Tudo Championship.
And he's pounding Fabio in the head. Fabio will not budge, though. He will not let him out of his grip. He's got his wrist locked.
Kerr was in, and he began training with fellow MMA upstarts Mark Coleman and Kevin Randleman. But little did anyone know that the signs of Kerr's eventual decline were present leading into his very first fight. To start, a part of Kerr's introduction to the sport involved getting acquainted with PEDs like anabolic steroids, but not to the level that he'd eventually reach.
So part of what I was prepared to do was, I didn't know what I was going to get into, but I'm going to make myself as big and as strong as I possibly can. Up to the age of 27, I hadn't touched any PEDs at all. I went ahead and experimented with anabolics and androgenics. You know, my first fights down in Brazil, I was on just a very small dose of an anabolic.
Plus, he was using pain pills to hide nagging injuries that haunted him throughout his grueling preparations. The hard work and chemicals paid off, so that the man who competed at 220 pounds in wrestling was now a lean 260. Heading into the tournament, the word on the Brazilian streets was that there was a new, large wrestler entering the competition. Keep in mind, though, that these were still the days of style versus style in many respects. So the fact that the Vale Tudo World Championship was in Brazil meant that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and its practitioners were the home team. They had seen big wrestlers before, and sheer size wouldn't be enough to deter the BJJ faithful. But when Fabio Gurgel, the tournament's favorite, finally spotted Kerr at the event's rules meeting, it wasn't the hulking Ohio native that set off the alarm bells that this guy was different. It was his coach. Hamilton was known by insiders for coaching NHB's influx of high-performance wrestlers. This was a neon-lit warning sign to anyone in the know, including Gurgel, who stated in a recent podcast, this was Richard Hamilton who coached the wrestlers. He coached Coleman. He coached Don Fry. This guy isn't any wrestler. He's coming with the front line of wrestling. On the night of the event, Kerr, the man who actually looked like the superheroes he wanted to be growing up, was scared to death.
But I was so scared to death, I wasn't even thinking about winning it. I was thinking about just not getting hurt. Before I fought Paul Varlans, I remember taking about this much a sip of water, like in a Dixie cup, and like walking around and going, just heaving this little smidgen of water up in myself, and I'm going, oh, you know, I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't believe I'm fucking doing this.
But before he knew it, the time for doubt was over. It was the moment of truth.
Our next fight, this is highly anticipated. In the blue corner, the American freestyle wrestler Mark Kerr, 28, 6'1", 260 pounds. He's from Toledo, Ohio. Freestyle wrestling is his forte. This is his first fight.
His first match was against the 6'8", 350-pound UFC veteran, Paul Varlans. He was an intimidating guy for sure.
And now coming in, the biggest here, Paul Varlans, 27 years old, 6'8", 330 pounds. He scales the top rope. He's from San Jose, California.
But the aftermath of this match would dampen the mood of the Brazilian crowd and any hope they had of an easy tournament for their homegrown talent.
And the second I went out there, and the second it was in the ring, and the second the bell rung, it was totally different. It was like all that fear, anxiety, and tension and stuff was totally focused in on the other person.
He quickly hit an expert double leg and began smashing Varlans into the mat with some of the most frightening ground and pound to this day.
He's just taking some brutal shots in the face.
Brutal shots. Outweighed, Varlans is 80 pounds heavier than Kerr, but Kerr is just demonstrating some vicious power.
Sharp punches and sickening knees transformed Varlans' face into a disfigured crimson mask before the referee had seen enough.
Tremendously from the mouth and the eyes, but he does not give up.
And it went on for a while.
But I'll tell you what, his face is just destroyed right now.
That initial victory was all it took for Kerr to be convinced. he was going to be good at this.
It kind of got me fired up, you know, it's like, okay, I can get in there and just manhandle these people.
The next match was even more shocking. Kerr's opponent literally noped out of the ring while the American behemoth scratched and clawed to deliver just a little bit more damage before his prey escaped. And then he was in the final against the tournament favorite, and the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu's lone defender left, Fabio Gurgel. While the fight is remembered by the Brazilians of this era as one of the great victories for refusing to lose while defending their national art, the rest of us remember it as a 40-minute horror show where the much larger Mark Kerr disfigured Gurgel with punches and headbutts until the ringside doctors refused to let it go on any longer.
Rarely from these types of fighters, but people just give up. Kerr would either just saying I give up or Fabio saying I give up. I don't know. These guys just don't have it in their heart, in their mind. He's almost got him stretched out. He's looking for a double arm bar. If he can get those arms around it, Gurgel was trying to get those legs around his neck, the neck of Kerr, if he was able to do that, but Kerr, sweaty and strong, able to pull out lefts, punishing open hands, lefts, rights to the face of Gurgel. We're waiting for the decision.
I'll be surprised if this goes on, Greg.
Yeah, it was truly an amazing fight by both fighters. They did an amazing job. Fabio's ready to go. His face is totally puffed up. He can't see that left eye. But the warrior that he is, he's ready to continue. But it looks like they're stopping it. We're still a little bit unsure of what's going on here right now. We're looking for the decision. And it's a decision. And it should have been. And it should have been.
And like a bolt from the blue, Mark Kerr stood as the World Vale Tudo heavyweight champion. His maiden voyage into professional fighting was a marauding tear right to the top of the nascent sport's top prospects. Plus, it taught Kerr an early lesson in what he'd need to be willing to do if he were to swim in this primal form of competition.
The question you ask yourself is, how competitive are you? What lanes are you willing to go to try to win? You gonna poke him in the eye? Are you gonna take your thumb and dig it in the cut and pull it open a little wider? Of course you will.
This championship win didn't just kickstart Kerr's career. It also gave him one of the most iconic nicknames in all of MMA, even today. The event was covered by Tatame magazine, and on the cover, a close-in shot of Kerr crushing Gurgel's throat with his forearm, and the words, translated in English, the smashing machine. Kerr is the most talented wrestler I've ever worked with in MMA, and he has the most potential of all. But Kerr's underlying issues became crystal clear to Hamilton once the pair made the trip home. The newly minted smashing machine busted out an extra suitcase from the flight home. In it, a treasure trove of prescription pain medications that Kerr simply couldn't pass up.
And it became prescription abuse, and then from abuse it became addiction. And then once you turn that corner, once you cross that invisible line, there's no going back.
Hamilton and Kerr grew apart, but within a short few months, Kerr would be back to training for another tournament. But this time, it wouldn't be in Brazil. It would be stateside and in the UFC 14 heavyweight tournament. Kerr ratcheted up his training and his PED use for UFC 14.
When I went into the UFC, I thought it was stepping it up a whole nother gear. And so my first UFC fights, I was probably 275 pounds with, 5% body fat. Could bench press a small car, could squat, a small house, and it was just totally overkill.
And his pain medications were even more necessary as he pushed himself even further, thinking that the UFC would be a massive step up in competition. In short, it wasn't. Kerr blazed through the tournament in 3 minutes and 58 seconds combined. His first opponent was a Krav Maga practitioner who was mercilessly cratered into the octagon's gray canvas.
Boy, he can punch. Again, a couple of blows, and McCarthy steps in because Moni Harnstein was basically defenseless.
Next, in the final, came Dan Bobish, an experienced and skilled fighter who deserved just as much as Kerr to stand in the final. But he too fell by the wayside, as Kerr pulled a 1-of-1 submission finish. Submission by chin to the eye.
Fight name ever?
Oh, so good. I saw him submit a guy with his chin in the guy's eye socket.
Oh.
It was an early UFC. He mounted this guy Dan Bobish, and he stuck his chin in the guy's eye socket and just fucking drove his chin.
Legal?
It was then.
Bobish readjusts, he's tapping out.
That's it. Now we've got a champion in Mark Kerr. A minute 38 to tap out.
UFC 14 tournament winner went straight back to work, this time enlisting the help of Bas Rutten and Beverly Hills Jiu-Jitsu Club to enhance his skill set. Because even though Kerr was sure that his wrestling worked, he still wasn't sure if he knew how to fight. He trained along legends like Oleg Taktarov, Pedro Hizzo, Marco Huas, and the aforementioned striking specialist, Bas Rutten. The training was difficult, and it required Kerr to have a beginner mindset as he got beat up on the feet and submitted on the floor. Fast forward to UFC 15, and Kerr was as ready as he could be. The supplemental training with Rutten's team had him feeling confident. Plus, he was nearly at his peak steroid use, still believing that bigger equals better without the possibility of diminishing returns. The UFC 15 heavyweight tournament proved even easier for Kerr, as he crushed both his opponents in under a combined 2 minutes. First, Greg Scott. Kerr knocked him flat with a standing knee.
So here we go. Mark Kerr quickly going after his opponent. Greg the Ranger stopped. The Ranger goes down.
One knee. That's one knee.
A sure sign of Kerr's growing skill set. Next for the final, the Smashing Machine strangled Dwayne Casson with a rear naked choke.
He gave his back to Kerr. Look for that rear naked choke. There it is.
He got him quickly. He turned and tapped.
The Smashing Machine, Mark Kerr, had just won back-to-back UFC tournaments in a grand total of 5 minutes and 12 seconds.
Guys, I'm here with the champion, Mark, the specimen Kerr. Now, did you expect this tournament to go by so quick? He had 2 fights. First fight, I misquoted. It wasn't the fastest, the 3rd fastest in UFC history. And then the second fight, also a quick fight. Did you expect that?
After a complete domination of the field in 2 tournaments, many wondered what could be next for the standout wrestler from Ohio. While he had a contract for a 3rd tournament showing, the new sport was at an all-time low thanks to censorship campaigns and government pressure. The UFC and all other no-holds-barred organizations were pulled from pay-per-view television. So with American cage fighting on the brink of collapse, most of the UFC's top talent flew to Japan to fight for the upstart Pride promotion. And while they were a younger promotion than the UFC, they made up for it with purses that dwarfed what the UFC could afford. Lucky for Kerr, the Pride organization was building a heavyweight division. And even better, they wanted him to be its star. So it was agreed that Kerr would take on the original UFC champion, Royce Gracie, at Pride 2. His deal with Pride paid him 5 times more than the UFC, and they were giving him a chance to take on the guy. The UFC tried to stop Kerr from competing for Pride with a lawsuit. Kerr considered himself to be able to accept a single bout agreement since his deal with the UFC was for another tournament.
With UFC, right, they didn't let you fight.
The UFC was claiming basically that they own my rights worldwide, that I had no ability to have an individual fight. I had signed, the contract I had with them was for 3 tournaments.
The legal dispute delayed the fight, causing Royce to injure his back in training when, if the UFC hadn't sued, the pair would have already fought by now. While Kerr's Pride debut wouldn't come against Royce Gracie, he'd still get paid the same for vanquishing his foe at Pride 2, $150,000 paid in cash. A good problem to have, but a difficult problem to solve. Across 3 more impressive wins, Kerr built himself as a must-see attraction in relatively easy fashion. MMA was red hot in Japan at the time, so the sports stars became national icons, mobbed by fans and showered with exuberant cheers.
Mark Kerr was emerging as the #1 mixed martial arts fighter in the world. He's become an international star.
I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out and seeing me tonight.
And this rabid response wasn't just for his imposing frame and gentle outside of the ring demeanor. He was also possibly the best heavyweight on earth. But not just in MMA. During this time, Kerr entered ADCC's 1999 tournament, winning his weight class and the absolute division. He wanted to represent wrestling amongst the world's best grappling arts, and he did it in dominant fashion. After returning to Pride and thrashing Nobuhiko Takada,
見えるようになったという風にね、高田は言ってます。これもうちょっと腕危ないですね。サイドに回ったぞ。腕を気をつけた方がいいですね。さあ、馬乗りになろうとしますね。ここからアームロックに入っていくのは、さあ、相手を投稿した。上がってしまった。このアームロック、伝家の宝刀。すごい力ですね。アームロックで高田信彦。
Kerr was booked for his toughest test to date. The now forgotten Russian terror that was Igor Vovchanchyn. Vovchanchyn had won multiple one-night tournaments, often with minimal rules, leading up to his tenure with Pride. But the time he faced Kerr, he was a staggering 36-2-1, which was nearly unheard of at the time. Most guys had fewer than 15 fights, and Vovchanchyn had almost 40. Around this time, Kerr's drug abuse was at an all-time high.
I think Pride just wanted the finished product. They didn't really particularly care how it got there. You know, they wanted you to look good, they wanted you to perform well, but they didn't particularly care if you ended up taking X, Y, and Z to get in the ring and look good and give them a good performance.
The pressure of great expectations, the increasingly intense training sessions, and the toxic relationship with his then-girlfriend Dawn Staples were taking a mental and physical toll that spurred him to use more and more pain medication. And at this point, he was almost exclusively injecting it. Plus, for such a tall task in front of him, he wasn't seriously training and was out drinking a mere 2 weeks before the toughest test of his career. While he initially took control of the bout, it wouldn't go his way. He took some nasty knees to the head on the ground that slumped him to the mat.
Double underhooks there by Vovchanchyn. Vovchanchyn grinding away, and a knee to the top of the head. Another knee to the top of the head. And Kerr is out!
Those knees were supposed to be illegal during this Pride 7 event. There was confusion over a short-lived rule change over knees to the head of a grounded opponent. Kerr would initially lose the bout via TKO, but it was later overturned to a no contest. But whether it was an official loss or not, it certainly felt like one to Kerr, who broke down on the elevator and an empty dressing room.
Took them all, man. Well, I mean, everything's gonna heal.
Everything's gonna heal. Right. My hands aren't broke, my feet are fine. My knees a little twisted. Head's a little banged
It's a battle.
up.
I mean, that guy is tough.
While Kerr was clearly addicted to substances at the time, this clip illustrates the other drug that fueled his desire: winning. The low of the loss was too much for Kerr, and began to spiral deeper into the throes of addiction, even to the point that his regular enabler and girlfriend started making it an issue. And then, in October 1999, barely a month following his no contest to Vovchanchyn, Kerr overdosed on painkillers, placing himself in such disrepair that he could barely maintain consciousness for longer than 30 seconds. The addiction had already gone too far a while ago, and now it was coming for his life. If things were going to change, it had to be decisive, and Kerr needed to fight harder than he ever had before. Thanks to a bedside intervention from some close college friends, Kerr was convinced to go to rehab and try to turn his life around. Thankfully, Kerr listened, and after cleaning mountains of paraphernalia from his home and placing them in a dumpster, he checked himself into rehab, pulling out of a scheduled November bout. He also split from his girlfriend due to her being unable to stop drinking around Mark. Free from painkillers, his toxic relationship, and alcohol, Kerr would go on the final great push of his career, although he didn't know that yet. Kerr returned to the ring January 2000 for the opening round of the Pride Grand Prix 2000 against Ensign Inoue, a hyper-aggressive all-rounder that Kerr would fall to if he weren't totally dialed in. For this fight, he spent most of his camp at Beverly Hills Jiu-Jitsu Club under the tutelage of fellow MMA pioneer Bas Rutten. Kerr had stopped working with Rutten during the height of his addiction, but the pair reconnected once Kerr mustered up the courage to open the door back into his former mentor's life. In the Inoue fight, Kerr dominated the exchanges with his wrestling and relentless ground punches. His size, strength, and newfound will were simply too much for his opponent to handle. By the end, he had qualified for the 8-man bracket.
There we go. Mark Kerr on a majority decision.
As far as the Pride Grand Prix 2000 would go, he was to face relative newcomer but experienced professional wrestler Kazuyuki Fujita. If he beat Fujita, he'd have the honor of fighting 2 more bouts that night to capture combat sports' largest trophy. But leading into the fight, the temptations of an addicted life came seeping back into Mark's world. He started drinking more, and now that Don was back in his life as well, he drank even more than he already had been. Even worse, the pair started arguing almost daily, causing the pressures of training camp in California to become too much for the relationship to bear. He cut his training camp short and opted to self-lead his preparation in his home state of Arizona until it was time to take off for Japan. As expected, Kerr wasn't physically or mentally prepared for what could have been a hellish campaign through 3 men in a single night. Fortunately or unfortunately, Kerr wouldn't make it past the quarterfinal.
He took Mark Kerr down. He defended against Mark Kerr. Here we're back in this same cocoon position.
Look at that.
That was a devastating knee.
Look at that. That man out to fight.
While the Smashing Machine was seemingly at full power to start off the match, his body eventually ran out of steam. After the loss, the only business Kerr had left in Japan was his post-fight medical exam and some stitches to the chin. And again, just like when Engel won the Olympics, Kerr watched as Coleman, a man he'd gone toe-to-toe with in training, take the trophy that could have been his. Coleman foisted the Pride Heavyweight Grand Prix trophy overhead after a career-defining comeback that corrected multiple years of bad luck. And while Coleman celebrated his crowning achievement, Mark Kerr sat in the back, receiving stitches from his failed effort against Fujita. While he now admits that he should have retired following the Fujita fight, Kerr continued to compete. He returned to Pride, destroying a 0-0 can in his comeback fight, Japanese matchmaking at its finest. He lost a rematch to Vovchanchyn, and then got stopped by a young Heath Herring. But there was some silver lining. He also returned to ADCC, claiming the Superfight Championship against Mario Sperry. This made him one of the few Triple Crown champions in ADCC history. These are people who've won a divisional title, absolute, and a Superfight Championship. As for his MMA career, Kerr stepped away from MMA for 3 years before mounting a comeback. The result was a self-inflicted KO from a botched takedown less than a minute into the fight. At this point, even the public thought it was time for the Smashing Machine to call it a career. Following that loss, Kerr's drinking was his main vice, but pills and other drugs would sometimes rear their head into the rotation of chemicals. By now, the Smashing Machine was fully out of commission. And for Kerr, retirement was hard. An addiction came crashing back into his life. Without the highs of competition, even in the losses, Kerr was faced with something he didn't know he feared: a normal life. While Kerr would sometimes find stability in his work or in occasional coaching opportunities, his addictions were an ever-present curse in the years immediately following his retirement, especially alcohol. Sleeping in his car, evicted from a halfway house, and years of self-destruction elapsed before he finally found the courage to ask for help, finding sure footing in a program that stuck, at least for a bit. But then, around 2018, things changed. Kerr's son challenged his father with a single request on the anniversary of Mary Kerr's passing. He said that he understood that today, drinking is expected. But he had a question. What about tomorrow? Would he stop drinking the next day? The answer, a surprise to even Mark Kerr, was yes. And now, with 7 unbroken years in recovery as of the recording of this video, the recent UFC Hall of Famer stands as an example not just to fighters, but to anyone who's dealt with an addiction or self-sabotage or difficult relationships. Mark the Smashing Machine Kerr changed MMA by the fact he was in it. Kerr's impact reverberated throughout the sport, whether you were aware of it or not. The UFC and other organizations started removing the weapons a fighter could use. And guess what? They were the weapons of an early Mark Kerr, and by extension, Mark Coleman. For fighters, Kerr serves as both a shining inspiration towards the pursuit of well-roundedness and singular focus, while also being an unfortunate cautionary tale of what drugs, a toxic relationship, and unchecked professional pressure can do to you. Especially if you allow substances to be the only pressure release valve. And for everyone else, Kerr serves as a reminder that it's never weak or too late to ask for help when you're dealing with a personal burden. Because even if you have the veneer of wealth, health, or a dream fulfilled, there's sometimes nothing more courageous than reaching out for support. For the Modern Martial Artist, this has been Coby McKinley, wishing you happy training.